Hi, and welcome back to another Shame Plays notes series on Out of the Abyss, the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition um, Underdark adventure. So this is kind of my notes as I take a group of players through the adventure at my friendly local game store. So apologize in advance, I'm a little under the weather, but I want to get this out. So, and I'm also I need to be in bed. Doctor told me to go to bed, but it's kind of hyped up right now and I can't get to sleep. So I'm kind of hoping working on some stuff will maybe ease me to where I'll go to bed. But anyway, all that being said, before I get started, I want to point out a spreadsheet on Google Docs that I'm going to link on this video as part of the notes. One of my players, I asked him if I could give him credit, and he said, yeah, his name is Tom King, made this spreadsheet for D&D 5th edition calculating ability scores for the different races. So it's very handy. It basically, you plug in what the ability scores are that you rolled or used for point buy system or the standard array or whatever, and then it'll calculate based on race. It'll automatically adjust them for you. And then tab 2 has like many arrays from the point buy system. So it's just all these different ways to slice and dice the point buy system, and of course it has the standard array in there. So you get, I think, 27 points to play with, something like that. And there's all these different ways. So you could just look at that and pick something instead of, how do I want to do all the point system? So it's very handy. I'll link that in the show notes, or not the show notes, the video notes for this. So definitely handy. Recommend you check it out. A lot of my players are very creative and do very cool stuff like this. So I think that you'll find that spreadsheet handy for your own character creation when you'd like to use it. So Tom, thanks for that. So getting into the actual notes from the most recent session, when they ended last session, they had just defeated the Medusa, but the Tiefling Ranger Catalyst, who had ironically just had Greater Restoration cast in order to cure the aging effect from the ghost horrifying visage, turned around and got petrified by the Medusa. So, and by the way, I put some really good notes in there on how the Medusa's petrifying gaze works and how it doesn't work, including does the old looking through a mirror trick protect you? So if you're curious about that, go check out the last video. I thought there were some interesting notes on that and some stuff that I had assumed, but that isn't really strictly in the rules. So, of course, as a DM, you can do it however you want. But anyway, yeah, so the player that got petrified, we picked right up this session. Medusa just got defeated. Player got petrified. And I had assumed they would go back out into Blingdenstone, go to the cleric, and get, the spell casting in. But the player, and I want to give this player a shout out, at the end of the session at the store the other night, I even had everyone, acknowledge her and give her a round of applause, because she's like, no, I'm cool. You guys can I'll hang out and have a good time. And, I thought that was very generous on her part. She was totally fine with it. So she just hung out last session and kind of watched everything happen and enjoyed all the talking and the stuff that was going on. So, every player is different. There's some players who are like, absolutely not. I want to be cured so I can be part of what's happening tonight. But she was very cool about it. I was also surprised. I don't know if I mentioned this last session or the session before, but I'll mention it again here just in case I didn't. At the beginning of every session, I have everybody roll a d20 that was here the week before, and whoever rolls the lowest has to recount what happened the week before. And I do this, one, to engage the players so that they're more engaged in, hey, here's what happened last week and not everybody's just relying on me. But also, I want individual responsibility on the players for keeping up with that. You know, a DM is many things, but the DM is not your secretary. So I shouldn't have to, at the beginning of every session, bring everybody up to speed. I mean, there's certain things that the individual players and the party, the group as a whole, is responsible for. So I've started instituting that. I read that somebody on a blog somewhere, maybe a video I was watching, mentioned that, and I adopted that into this campaign. I thought it was a great idea. So, and I do award between 0 and 100 experience points depending on how well the recounting is done. How much, once they're done, do I have to step in and say, okay, and then also this and that and the other. And usually I award about 50. Every now and then I'll award 75. But recently, it might have been last session. I'm just mentioning it here again, just in case it was this last session, not the session before. But the same player that's gotten petrified and all that, they rolled the well. Actually, they rolled the lowest and they tied another player, and that player's like, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, no, that's rules. You know, if it's you, it's you. So they had to have a roll off, and the player that got petrified lost the roll off, so had to recount. Pulls out her phone, gets on her phone, and gives an absolutely spectacular recounting of everything that happened the previous session. So the reason I'm bringing this up, a lot of times players, while you're at the table, will be on their phones, you know, thumbing it. And I usually don't like that. I want, one, for the respect of the DM trying to tell a story and get everybody going and doing everything, but also for the other players. You know, you need to be paying attention what the other players are doing too. Not just zone out and do your own little thing, and then when it comes around, you go, oh, where are we at? What are we doing? Okay, well, I don't like that kind of thing. I don't know many DMs who do, or other players, really. It's kind of rude. Um, but this player is always on their phone during the game, but had always seemed to be plugged in, so I had never made an issue out of it. Because whenever it came around to them, they jumped right in. They seemed to know what was going on. Da da da. Turns out this player takes meticulous notes of what's happening every session while they're playing, and they also have their character sheet on their phone. So as stuff is happening with their character, they're adjusting that. So just throwing out there, you know, don't automatically assume, as I normally do, that if somebody's going nuts on their phone during the game, that they're ignoring the game. This this particular player. Now, some players are, and that should be addressed. You're breaking the unwritten rules, or maybe even the written rules of the group and the table. But this particular player was actually using her device in a way that was engaging her more deeply. And I was impressed. I gave her 100 XP after she recounted. That's the first time that's happened in our game where, you know, she rolled the lowest, she recounted the previous session, and she got 100 XP. That's the first time anybody's ever gotten 100 XP because she gave an amazing recap based on all that. So just wanted to point that out. Um, you know, just before you assume that you know, they're blowing you off, don't assume that, you know, don't, make sure you find out, because I could have easily at some point been the big jerk. Game. Could you please put your phone away? And then it turns out that, you know, there's no need to. So um, also, this was interesting to me. There was a little bit of metagaming going on here, and um, and I'll explain a little bit more about that here in a minute. But the players at the end of last session, the session previous, I mentioned, had enough XP to make 5th level. And I had told them, I said, go ahead and calculate 5th level, and on your next long rest, you'll be 5th level. So they opted not to take a long rest and continue exploring that this most recent session, which kind of surprised me because as a player, I'm like, I want my 5th level abilities and hit points and all that. But they chose to keep going. Now, there's a little bit of metagaming as to why. And I'm going to throw up right now a neat little thing, a meme or whatever that I found on metagaming recently that I thought was really funny. So I'm going to insert that here real quick so you can look at that. But what they did was I had 2 new players show up. for this past session. One of them is new to role-playing, period. Have seen some videos online. Let me tell you, this stuff like Acquisitions Incorporated and Critical Role and all that, where people are playing, all this stuff on Twitch, these different people, I can think of, how Reroll, some folks like that are playing D&D on Twitch or, on through Chris Perkins and Acquisitions Incorporated and Matt Mercer and Critical Role and all that stuff. This is getting people wanting to play D&D and other role-playing games. So even though that stuff, now I like the Acquisitions Incorporated because it's funny. Critical Role isn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I'm not against it. If they want to do it and have fun with it, they can. And if people like to watch it, more power to you. But this stuff is getting people wanting to play because there's been, once or twice where people have showed up at this table in the past year or so where they're like, I've just seen it online and so I don't know how to play, but I want to. And, so whether you like that stuff or not, it's good for the hobby. So so they've seen some YouTube videos. Another guy showed up who is a brother of another player and is experienced at D&D but never played 5th edition. I don't think ever played 4th edition either. So they knew the concept, but they needed to be shown a little bit of how 5th edition worked. But what we did, because I had 2 new players show up, boom. And the players that brought them gave me as much heads up as they could. Fair enough. And even if I have somebody just walk into the store and say, do you have a D&D group? And they point at me and they come over and set in, I'll make that work. Because I play at a store, and the point is anybody who shows up at the store within reason, we'll work them in. Now, we've had 10, 11, 12 people in the group, and I don't like to do that long term, but we'll make it work if we can. So what I normally do is one of my players, I've mentioned this before, like I said, I have some very creative players, and another player has statted up Eldith, the Dwarven Scout NPC that has become really almost basically a party member. They were one of the NPCs that the group starts the game with at the beginning of Out of the Abyss, and she's just kind of come into her own. But I've had a player fully statted her out, did a great job with it. And so now what we do is we kind of keep her in the background unless for story reasons we need her. Or if they're a couple players short and they're getting to a combat, I'll let somebody play her so they'll have some extra melee or something like that. But she's perfect for when somebody just drops in to pick up that night. Hey, I want to play. Let me check this out. Here you go, Eldith. And we use Eldith, Dwarven Scout. Not really a scout class, but we kind of adapted, kind of a rogue fighter with multi-attacks and that sort of thing. Works out really well. Well, I had 2 people show up the same night without characters. And it was one of those nights where because of work, I had to get there, I had to get going. We had to go till playtime ended, and I had to go. So there was no wiggle room on time. And, they were sitting there rolling up character, and I said, guys, I'm not trying to be rude, but we can't do brand new characters tonight. There's just no time to roll, and like, because we're trying to get going, and their friends and stuff are still here, roll this, and so we just don't have time for that tonight. I said, if you like tonight and you want to come back, then we'll make sure that you get your own character, but for tonight, we're not going to be able to do that. So basically, we happen to have 2 copies of Eldith, so they both played Eldith. Now, they adjusted, so one of them made Eldith a male and gave them a different name like Grimgoth or something like that. The brand new player who's never played D&D at all, the other new player played her as Eldith. But we just said, okay, there's 2 copies of Eldith, and let's just roll with it. Sometimes you just have to, you have to willingly suspend disbelief because it is a game, and just say they're just there. But we joked around and kind of said that because of the Fair's Rest, highly concentrated magic areas in the Underdark, and also the madness of the demon lords infecting the Fair's Rest, that suddenly she felt kind of weird and split into 2 people. So that's kind of how we joked around about it. And one of the other players joked around that there was a doppelganger that had brain damage and literally thought that it was Eldith. So we just kind of winked at it and kept going, and we had fun. It was fine. So it was, it was totally fine. Uh, but anyway, so they both played Eldith, or a version of Eldith, just for demonstration. And remember, you got to be more flexible. I'm not sure I would allow this if I was running a group at home, like a long-term group, and it was in my home once a week and it was a different situation. I'm not sure I would allow that kind of thing. But at a store, where the point is, I help the store. The store helps me. They give me a discount on some stuff. I'm going to do my best to make sure that when people show up, they have a place to play. So, and do it in such a way that everybody has fun. And it didn't seem to mess up anybody's stride. Everybody just took it and laughed about it, and we had fun. So it didn't seem to pop the bubble of disbelief of the game or anything like that. So now I will say that one of my new players, the player that had never played a role-playing game. Now they played computer games, but they never played tabletop role-playing games. You forget about the enthusiasm. And now, be clear, there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Stupidity means you're dumb. Ignorance means you're just simply not aware of something. You could be Einstein and still be ignorant on certain subjects. Okay, so you forget about until you play with a brand new player who's never played a tabletop role-playing game before, only heard about it or whatever, and their friend says, hey, you want to come play? They say, yeah, and then they're all excited. You forget about the enthusiasm and the ignorance they have of the etiquette of how games work at a table. And you forget, you got to learn that stuff. I'm sure the first few times I played a role-playing game, I committed some major breaches of etiquette and didn't realize it. So as DMs, just be prepared for that. And I let stuff go the other night because he was having fun. I want him to have fun. And it didn't seem to be bothering the people at the table, really. But there was some stuff, it's like, we really need to address that if it keeps going. So I'm going to let him play a few sessions, and if it seems that there's problem areas that I will, I'll address that. One is the center of attention wanted to be on them constantly. It didn't matter if they were in combat, out of combat, They wanted to do everything and tell the party, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Everybody, hold up a second, let me check this out. They wanted to do the rogue stuff. They wanted to be the melee person. They wanted to be in the middle of everything. So, but because you don't want to dampen enthusiasm, and it didn't seem to be bothering my table that much, I went ahead and let it go. Plus, I don't want to embarrass somebody by calling them out the first night. And it wasn't that big of a deal. But if it keeps going session after session after session, yeah, it would be a problem. So, try to be understanding of the enthusiasm of new players, because this player, there were multiple combats where they were fighting earth elementals, and he would climb up on the back of earth elementals and shout out 1v1 and sit there and try to pound on. And I guess 1v1 is a 1 versus 1. Maybe it's a catchphrase for computer games or something. I don't know. And was like, they're trying to hurt the elemental and it's hurting him too, and all this crazy stuff. Now it did kind of help him because the elemental would be trying to knock him off their back and stuff like that, and it was keeping attacks from going from the rest of the group. But the way that it was done, it wasn't really about what's the best for the party. It's about what's the most interesting thing for my character at this moment, which is a very, very, very easy way of thinking to roll into for a brand new player. Like, for example, they were like checking for traps and doing all this stuff. I got a rogue already in the group, and so you want to let each player shine. So, and at the same time, you want everyone to have fun. I don't want to call somebody out in the middle of a game and embarrass them. So I'll handle it if I need to. I'll do it privately, or maybe I'll have his friend who brought him say, hey, can you mention this to your friend? maybe he'd take it better from them or whatever. But it wasn't that big of a deal. I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm just projecting it could become a problem. But at the same time, I understand where it's coming from. Brand new player, totally enthusiastic, really enjoying things. So, and he had fun. He's going to come back. He's rolling up his own character. So, but talking about the metagaming that I was talking about earlier, they decided to press on and keep exploring rather than take Catalyst, the Tiefling Ranger, back to the Cleric in Blingdenstone to get cured of petrification, because they had 2 extra melee characters suddenly. Because normally Eldith does not actively engage in melee unless there's people who don't show up and they need, like, oh, well, you guys need another melee character or something like that. So suddenly, not only do they have 1 Eldith, they have 2 Eldiths. And they're like, oh, let's keep... So they were metagaming, and they admitted they were metagaming. But what I'm going to tell them, no, you're not allowed to do that. We all metagame to a certain level. I actually had a good discussion with that with Chris Birch of Modifius Entertainment. I interviewed him for the new Star Trek role-playing game that's coming out, Star Trek Adventures. It was actually the most recent show. It should be coming out on the channel here pretty soon. And he was talking about, everybody metagames to a certain level. It's hard not to. But what you try to do is, kind of rein it in. But they were like, yeah, we got 2 extra fighters tonight we might not have in the future. We're going to keep exploring. I'm like, all right, that's fine. So they metagamed it. And like I said, I didn't really mind. It's whatever. There's always going to be a certain little amount of metagaming. And, really tactically, strategically, it made sense. So, now, finally, really most of what happened after I've introduced all that, there's one of the chambers right next to the Medusa chamber is the temple that the cleric in Blingdenstone has asked them to cleanse. And that's Gurnik. What is his name? Gurnik. La la la. Let's see when it's Gurnik. What's your name, Gurnik? Gurnik Tapfinger, who is the cleric, head priest of Caladuran Smooth Hands. So, he had asked them, hey, fine, we need to cleanse this old temple in the Rockblight. The Rockblight's sort of the mini dungeon area they're in inside Blingdenstone, which is the Deep Gnome City. And he said, take this gem and you'll find a menhir that has a socket in it, and you put that gem in there, and then it'll activate a hallow, it'll help cleanse the temple and all this stuff. So I had one of those moments where the characters, I'll read the description of the room that they went into. The floor of this cavern is worn smooth. This is area 22 in the Rockblight Blingdenstone area, by the way. Once a temple of Caladur and Smooth Hands, Deep Gnome's god of stone and mining, the cavern was named after his long-lost Galabdur protectors, the Darabsun. And Galabdur are these sort of neutral elementals that can be summoned as servants or protectors. The floor of this cavern is worn smooth, but the walls are rough. A great menhir carved from a stalagmite stands in the center of the chamber, pockmarked with dozens of empty sockets that might once have held gems. Also, characters with passive wisdom score of 14 or higher notice that the roughness of the walls outlines several large, vaguely humanoid shapes. There was more than one character in the group that has a passive perception of 14 or greater, so I mentioned that to them. They immediately metagamed. How do they know it? I mean, how do you not do this and assume that, oh, we're going to get attacked by earth elementals, which is exactly what is going to happen. But anyway, so they see this, and I'm like waiting. I describe to them, and they're like, okay, well, let's look around. And I'm like, this is the temple. This is the temple. But sometimes what seems so obvious to you as a DM, for whatever reason, the PCs just aren't getting it. Maybe that they weren't expecting to find it. Maybe it doesn't look like what they were expecting to see in their mental imagery. Maybe they've just completely forgotten. Like, they know they need to do it, but it's not on the front burner. It's on the back burner, and they're just not even really thinking about it. They're thinking about, hey, we just killed a Medusa, and we have 2 new, we have 2 Eldiths all of a sudden. So I'm like, wow. And they're looking around, they're searching stuff, they're checking out this rough you know, and I was like, it's not like bas reliefs, it's not like carved in there, it's just vaguely humanoid shapes. So they kept looking at that. They're looking at the standing stone, the menhir that has sockets in it where, you know, gems are missing. Um, Pockmarked with dozen empty sockets that might once have held gems. So I'm like, this is obvious as it gets. You found the temple, take the spell gem that has the hallow spell in it, stick it in there, and let's go. You know, let's keep moving forward. And they're just not getting it. And I'm like, you know, you're one of those points where you're like a DM and you're like, I don't want to take their agency away, but they really need to know where they're at. So I'm like debating, do I give them enough hints that they just, you know, figure it out, you know, apply a subtle hint with a sledgehammer, or do I just let them keep exploring and then come back to it later? So what I did was their cleric, um, I said, give me an intelligence roll, like an arcana roll or something, because I'm thinking, you know, she talked with Gurnik, showed interest in his area in Blingdenstone, and will pay attention to religion. So I'm thinking she's got the best chance of going, oh, and the light bulb going off. Well, she rolled pretty low. She rolled like a 9 or something. I don't remember what it was. It was low enough that I didn't feel comfortable because saying, okay, that was enough. So I'm like, I'm really kind of trying to struggle what to do. Like, do I keep hinting or do I let them leave? And then and I was like, okay, so you got the standing stone that has sockets like where a gem may go. I just mentioned that again. And one of the players went, oh, wait a minute. Weren't we supposed to do something like that with the gem we were given? And I'm like, I don't know. Were you? You know, kind of like hint, hint. So they figured it out on their own, fortunately. But so they stick the spell gem that Gurna gave them into one of the sockets, and they were like, well, which socket? You know, they're checking traps on these sockets, and they're doing all this crazy stuff. They're like, and I'm like, all the sockets seem pretty much the same. So they finally stick one in a socket, stick the gem in one of the sockets. You know, as the ruby begins to glow against them in here, the walls begin to rumble. Part of one wall shifts, detaches, and charges towards you. And what happens from this point, and this is a long fight because these earth elementals are tough. You know, they're resistant to a lot of stuff, but two, they got a lot of hit points. So an earth elemental charges out of the wall. They fight it. As soon as it's defeated, another earth elemental comes rushing out. Well, actually, before that, a Galabdur, which is more of a neutral, friendly earth elemental, after each elemental is defeated that runs out of the wall to attack, it's defeated, and a Galabdur rises up out of the floor and takes sort of a guarding stance around the standing stone. But it doesn't take any other, it just stands there. It doesn't notice the characters, it doesn't interfere with the characters or anything like that. And then another elemental comes running out, and they fight it. And then another Galabdur, I guess I'm saying that right, rises up. And then another elemental runs out, they fight it, defeat it, and another Galabdur rises up. So that's basically this room. That's what you have to do to cleanse the temple and then go back to Gurnik and get the blessings he's going to give you. Now this is a long fight. We defeated 2 earth elementals, and then I said, okay, another one is running out, and I said we have to stop it right there. And we stopped it right there. I had to take a picture of where we're at. Unfortunately, it was one of those nights I had to go. When I had to go, I couldn't let things go any longer. So there's 2 Galabdur risen, there's another earth elemental running out, and they're about to fight it. And that's where we stopped. So, and it was a long fight. It was probably an hour fighting those 2 earth elementals. That sounds about right. And because, you know, a lot of the stuff, they weren't using, in some cases, they weren't using magic weapons. You know, they were doing this little 1, 2, 3, 4 hit points at a time. And they finally, on the second earth elemental, they, like, a couple of the characters were swapping weapons and this and that, so they would all have magical weapons and be beating this thing down. But the first elemental took a while. And the second one took a little while, longer than your average, you know, beastie. But the first one took a long time, and then they started getting kind of their tactics together. And in the meantime, the brand new player playing an Eldith clone is, riding on the backs of them going 1v1 and like, stabbing and shooting and I'm fudging all these mechanics because he's asking me, well, what if I just shoot him from right here with my, or not like this with a crossbow? I'm like, well, I guess that would give you advantage if you're just shooting right down into him and he's trying to pound you. I guess I'd give him disadvantage. I don't know if I was doing it right or not. I was just kind of having a good time. Everybody seemed like they were having a good time. But anyway, so they defeated 2 Earth Elementals. There's a third one. And the important thing to remember is these Galabdur, when they rise up, it says they emerge from a ground near the Menhir in an unoccupied space. The Galabdur faces outwards in a guarding pose but doesn't move or responds. Another Earth Elemental then emerges from the wall of the chamber and attacks. When it is destroyed, a second Stoic Galabdur appears. This summoning process repeats once more until the third Elemental appears and is destroyed. The Elementals ignore the Galabdur, which continue to stand motionless throughout the fight. When the characters reduce 3 Earth Elementals to 0 hit points and summon 3 Galabdur, a white light shines through the Menhir, producing a halo effect, protecting the Galabdur from the influence of Ogremok's Bane. Remember, Ogremok's Bane is this entity that lives in the Rockblight. It's like this sentient dust entity that can take over elementals. But these Galabdur are protected from that. The Galabdur then animate and acknowledge characters of the Grave Nod before settling down in their boulder guise around the Menhir. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. And after that, you go back to Gurnik, and he gives the blessings and all that. But we still got one more Earth Elemental to defeat. And interestingly enough, some of the characters are hurt. They're starting to run low on spells, because remember, they didn't do a long rest before this, and they've been throwing spells like crazy trying to defeat these Earth Elementals. So it's interesting how this is, how this has gone. I will say, unless you adjust the hit points of the Earth Elementals, unless my party was just not doing a good, effective job against these Elementals for whatever reason, and they're usually pretty effective in combat, prepare for this room to take a while. It's a long combat. So I just want to point, not boring, it's fine, it's fun, but it's just going to be a long combat. So just want to point that out. So that's basically where we got to on the last session. I hope this was interesting to you. As always, feel free to leave a comment and a thumbs up on the video. That helps me a lot. I appreciate your comments and questions. I love to address them. And we will catch you next time on the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to check out that spreadsheet from Tom that I'm going to link on the video. Have a good one.